January 13th, 1983. A cold rain fell over a quiet street in Queens, New York. The neighborhood looked ordinary. Cars lined the curb. A few lights glowed behind apartment windows. Nothing suggested that one of the deadliest men in organized crime was about to begin another ordinary day. Inside a modest apartment, a man carefully buttoned his jacket. He checked his watch, finished a cup of coffee, kissed his wife goodbye. To anyone watching, he looked like an average working man. But before the sun went down, someone else would probably disappear forever. There would be no witnesses, no warning, no struggle, just another name quietly erased from the Mafia's books. For years, police chased a ghost. Bodies appeared in empty lots, inside abandoned warehouses, stuffed into the trunks of stolen cars. Sometimes they never appeared at all. Every victim had one thing in common. Someone had decided they were no longer useful. And somewhere in the shadows, one man made sure that decision became permanent. The strangest part? He wasn't a mafia boss. He didn't control a crime family. He wasn't famous like the men giving the orders. He was something far more dangerous. He was the man those bosses called when failure wasn't an option. A professional killer. A man investigators would eventually believe had taken part in well over 100 murders. His name was Richard Kuklinski. The world would come to know him as the Iceman. But the story people think they know is only part of the truth. Because before he became America's most feared contract killer, he was something else entirely. A frightened little boy growing up inside one of the most violent homes imaginable. And that childhood would shape every decision that followed. So how does an abused child become the man the Mafia trusted with impossible jobs? And was Richard Kuklinski really the legendary hitman everyone believed he was? The answers begin long before the bodies, long before the contracts, long before anyone called him the Iceman. Richard Leonard Kuklinski was born on April 11th, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey. It was a city of factories, crowded neighborhoods, and working-class families trying to survive through the Great Depression's aftermath. From the outside, the Kuklinski household looked like many others. Behind the front door, it was a nightmare. His father, Stanley Kuklinski, was known for explosive violence. His mother, Anna, believed brutal punishment was the only way to raise children. According to Richard's later accounts, beatings were part of daily life. Fear wasn't an occasional visitor. It lived in the house. One tragedy haunted the family forever. Richard's older brother, Florian, died after what was reported as a fall down the stairs. Richard later claimed his father had beaten the boy so severely that the family covered up the real cause of death. Whether every detail of that story is true has been debated. But one thing is beyond question. Violence surrounded Richard from the beginning. Over time, something inside him changed. Most children learn empathy. Richard learned survival. Every beating convinced him that showing fear only invited more pain. So he stopped showing it. He buried every emotion beneath a face that revealed almost nothing. Years later, detectives would describe that expression as terrifying. Not because it looked angry, because it looked completely empty. Outside his home, life offered little comfort. Neighborhood gangs ruled the streets. Respect wasn't earned through kindness. It came through intimidation. Richard quickly realized that being feared was safer than being vulnerable. As a teenager, he became fascinated by power. Not political power, physical power, the ability to decide who walked away and who didn't. His anger found an outlet. One day, after claiming he had been bullied by a local teenager, Richard allegedly tracked the boy down. Instead of fighting him, he attacked with shocking brutality. Years later, Kuklinski claimed that was the first time he killed someone. Some investigators questioned parts of his confession. Others believed it revealed something much darker. Because Richard never described the act with excitement. He described it like solving a problem. That cold, detached thinking would become his signature. While other criminals lost control in moments of rage, Richard preferred patience. He watched. He waited. Then he struck without emotion. That difference made him valuable. Very valuable. As he entered adulthood, Richard worked ordinary jobs to support his growing family. He married Barbara Pedersey in 1961. Neighbors remembered a quiet husband who mowed the lawn, fixed things around the house, and smiled politely. Children played outside. Families waved hello. Nobody imagined they were living next door to a man building a secret life in the criminal underworld. Money was always tight. Richard wanted more. Legitimate work paid slowly. Crime paid immediately. He started small, selling stolen goods, hijacking shipments, moving illegal merchandise for organized crime associates. His massive 6'5" frame made him intimidating. But it wasn't his size that impressed experienced criminals. It was his discipline. He never talked too much, never drank heavily during business, never attracted unnecessary attention. Most importantly, he always finished the job. Word began spreading through New Jersey's underworld. There was a man who could solve difficult problems. Quietly, permanently. One connection led to another. Soon, Richard was working alongside criminals connected to New York's mafia families. He wasn't officially made into a crime family. His Polish background meant that door would never fully open. But the mafia didn't care about heritage when they needed someone eliminated. Results mattered. Richard delivered results. Among the figures who reportedly crossed paths with him was the feared contract killer Roy DeMeo, a powerful member of the Gambino crime family. DeMeo already commanded one of the most violent crews in organized crime. His group specialized in stolen cars, drug trafficking, and murder. They had developed a horrifying reputation for making bodies disappear so completely that investigators often had nothing to investigate. Richard admired men like DeMeo, not because they were famous, because they understood efficiency. Emotion slowed people down. Fear created mistakes. The best killers, Richard believed, treated murder like any other profession. Plan carefully, work quickly, leave no evidence, go home, eat dinner with your family, act like nothing happened. That double life became almost effortless. One moment, he was coaching his children. The next, he was driving across state lines to meet dangerous men in deserted parking lots. Every successful assignment increased his reputation. Every completed contract brought more money, more trust, more dangerous requests. But with every body that disappeared, Richard moved deeper into a world where nobody retired peacefully. The mafia rewarded loyalty, until it didn't, because sooner or later, every killer discovers the same terrifying truth. The men who hire assassins eventually begin wondering whether the assassin knows too much. And Richard Kuklinski was about to learn that lesson firsthand. The first time Richard Kuklinski was asked to kill a complete stranger, he didn't ask why. He asked one question: when? That answer told him everything he needed to know. In the mafia's world, motives belonged to the bosses. Execution belonged to men like him. By the mid-1970s, Kuklinski had become far more than a thief or a fence for stolen goods. He was earning a reputation as someone who could solve the kinds of problems no one wanted to talk about. A witness who had become nervous. A partner who had grown greedy. A debtor who believed he could ignore the rules. When those problems appeared, a phone call was often all it took. And Richard answered. According to his own later confessions, he experimented with almost every method imaginable. Guns were fast but loud. Knives were personal. Poison created confusion. He even claimed to use cyanide on some victims because it left investigators struggling to determine exactly what had happened. Whether every murder he later described actually happened remains heavily disputed. Detectives believed he was responsible for many killings, but historians also agree that Kuklinski almost certainly exaggerated parts of his criminal career after his arrest. Separating fact from fiction became nearly impossible. But one thing wasn't in doubt. He was a dangerous killer, and organized crime knew it. As his reputation grew, another name continued to dominate New York's underworld: Roy DeMeo. Unlike Richard, DeMeo wasn't an outsider doing contract work. He was an established captain within the Gambino organization, surrounded by loyal men who followed orders without hesitation. His crew became infamous for what investigators later called the Gemini method. Victims were often lured into the back room of the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. One man distracted them with conversation. Another stepped behind them. A single gunshot, a knife to the heart. The body was dragged into another room, cut apart, wrapped, and disposed of before anyone outside knew the victim had disappeared. It was horrifying, but to DeMeo's crew, it was simply procedure. Kuklinski later claimed he occasionally worked alongside men connected to DeMeo's circle. Some investigators believed portions of those stories. Others questioned how closely the two men actually worked together. What mattered was this: Richard wanted the same reputation. Invisible, reliable, untouchable. The money was unlike anything he had earned before. One successful contract could bring in thousands of dollars. Soon he was buying expensive cars, better clothes, a larger home. To his wife, Barbara, he explained the money away with stories about business deals and wholesale products. She wanted to believe him. The alternative was unthinkable. At home, Richard played the role of a devoted father. He took family vacations, grilled food in the backyard, drove his daughters to school. His neighbors saw a quiet family man. What they didn't see were the sudden mood swings, the explosive anger, the fear that settled over the house whenever Richard walked through the front door after a long night. Barbara later admitted she rarely questioned where he had been. Sometimes it was safer not to know. Meanwhile, law enforcement was becoming increasingly frustrated. Bodies kept appearing across New Jersey and New York. Others simply vanished. Witnesses refused to cooperate. Those willing to speak often changed their stories within days. Fear traveled faster than evidence. The FBI and local investigators were also placing enormous pressure on New York's mafia families. Informants were beginning to cooperate. Electronic surveillance was improving. Federal prosecutors were building larger racketeering cases than ever before. For the first time in decades, powerful mob bosses realized that their greatest threat wasn't rival families. It was betrayal. Inside the underworld, paranoia spread like a disease. Every conversation became suspicious. Every unexpected phone call raised questions. Who was talking? Who had flipped? Who would be next? Richard watched it happen. He understood something many criminals didn't. The mafia wasn't built on trust. It was built on usefulness. The moment someone became a liability, their life lost its value. That realization changed him. He became even more careful. He avoided discussing business over the phone. He varied his routes. He switched vehicles frequently. He rarely met the same people twice in the same location. He believed preparation made him invisible. For years, it worked, or so he thought. Then came the mistake. Not a murder, not a witness, not even another gangster. Money. Greed slowly replaced caution. Kuklinski expanded beyond contract killings into large-scale piracy, stolen videotapes, counterfeit goods, and other criminal ventures that attracted attention from people outside the mafia. Unlike mob bosses who understood the unwritten rules of staying hidden, Richard began crossing paths with new criminals he barely knew. Some were reckless, others were desperate. One of them would unknowingly change the course of his life forever. An undercover operative named Dominic Polifrone entered Richard's world, posing as a fellow criminal looking for business opportunities. Patiently, Polifrone earned his trust. Meeting after meeting, conversation after conversation, Richard believed he had found another profitable partner. Instead, he had invited the law directly into his inner circle. And while Kuklinski believed he was planning his next contract, the FBI and New Jersey investigators were quietly planning something far more devastating. For the first time in decades, the hunter had become the hunted. He just didn't know it yet. Richard Kuklinski had spent decades believing one simple rule. If nobody could prove it, it never happened. That belief had kept him alive through years of violence, countless criminal deals, and a life built on secrets. Every job had been carefully planned. Every risk had been measured. Every loose end had been cut away before it could come back to haunt him. But there was one thing Kuklinski had never truly faced. Patience. Not his own. The FBI's. For more than a year, undercover investigator Dominic Polifrone slowly built a relationship with him. There were no dramatic arrests, no high-speed chases, no sudden confrontations. Instead, there were conversations, coffee meetings, business deals, long drives. Each encounter was designed to make Richard feel comfortable. The undercover detective played the role of a fellow criminal looking for opportunities. He never pushed too hard. He never asked too many questions. He simply listened. Richard believed he was dealing with someone who understood the criminal world. In reality, every word was being recorded. Every meeting added another piece to the puzzle. Every promise Richard made brought investigators one step closer. The man who had spent years studying other people had failed to realize someone was studying him. It was the biggest mistake of his life. By late 1986, investigators believed they finally had enough evidence to move. On December 17th, Richard Kuklinski arrived for what he thought would be another criminal meeting. Instead, police cars surrounded him. Officers moved in from every direction. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. For the first time in years, Richard Kuklinski wasn't the one controlling the situation. He was handcuffed and taken into custody. The man who had terrified so many others sat silently in the back of a police car. His long career in the shadows had come to an end. The arrest shocked almost everyone who knew him. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Friends refused to accept it. To them, Richard was the quiet man next door. He fixed things around the house. He smiled politely. He attended family gatherings. Nothing about him suggested he was capable of extraordinary violence. His wife, Barbara, later admitted she knew Richard had a violent temper. She had experienced that side of him herself. But even she said she never imagined the full extent of his criminal life. The double life Richard had created was astonishing. One world knew him as a loving father. The other knew him as someone who could make people disappear. As prosecutors prepared their case, Kuklinski faced multiple murder charges supported by recordings, witness testimony, and physical evidence. The walls that had protected him for years were finally closing in. In 1988, rather than face a lengthy trial on every charge, Richard pleaded guilty to several murders. He received multiple life sentences. There would be no release, no second chance. His world had shrunk from highways and hidden meeting places to concrete walls and steel bars. Most killers spend prison denying everything. Richard did something different. He talked. For years, journalists, psychologists, detectives, and documentary filmmakers visited him behind bars. And Richard had stories. Lots of them. He claimed responsibility for more than 100 murders. Sometimes he said the number was over 200. He described contract killings, mafia business, poisonings, cross-country body disposals, and meetings with powerful mob figures. The interviews turned him into one of America's most famous killers. Books were written. Television specials followed. Eventually, Hollywood drew inspiration from his life. But there was a problem. Many of his claims couldn't be verified. Experienced investigators agreed that Richard Kuklinski was unquestionably a murderer, but they also believed he enjoyed building his own legend. Some stories changed over time. Others conflicted with established timelines. Certain murders he claimed responsibility for had already been linked to different offenders. His alleged partnership with Roy DeMeo remains one of the most debated parts of his story. While Kuklinski insisted they worked together on numerous contracts, many organized crime historians believe he greatly exaggerated the extent of that relationship. Why would he do that? The answer may lie in psychology. Richard Kuklinski had spent his entire life chasing control. As a child, he had none. His abusive father controlled the house. Fear controlled his emotions. Violence controlled his future. But inside prison, the only thing he still controlled was his story. By making himself appear larger than life, he remained powerful in the eyes of the public. Even behind bars, even serving life, the legend survived. Whether every detail was true almost became irrelevant, because people believe the myth, and myths are difficult to kill. Richard Kuklinski died on March 5, 2006, at the age of 70, inside a prison hospital in New Jersey. Officially, he died of natural causes. He never walked free again. Some questions went with him. How many people did he actually kill? Which confessions were true? Which were carefully crafted fiction? The exact number may never be known. But perhaps the real story isn't about statistics. It's about transformation. Richard Kuklinski wasn't born a legendary hitman. He was born into violence, raised in fear, shaped by cruelty. Then, one decision at a time, he crossed lines that became easier to cross with every passing year, until killing no longer felt extraordinary. It felt routine. His life also exposed a darker truth about organized crime. The men giving the orders often stayed hidden. The men carrying them out accepted all the risk. Hitmen were respected only as long as they remained useful. The moment they became dangerous or talked too much, they were expendable. Richard believed he was different. He believed he was smarter, more careful, untouchable. In the end, he discovered the same lesson that countless gangsters before him had learned. No matter how carefully you build a life on fear, fear eventually turns back toward its creator. The underworld promises power. It promises loyalty. It promises respect. But those promises always come with an expiration date. Long after the money disappears, long after the bosses are gone, and long after the headlines fade, only one thing remains: the choices that define a life. Richard Kuklinski wanted history to remember him as the ultimate hitman. Instead, history remembers something even more unsettling. A man who spent decades convincing the world he felt nothing, while leaving behind one of organized crime's most haunting questions. Where does the truth end and the legend begin?